Welcome to Future Focus, a financial strategies podcast where we make the complex simple. I'm Troy Branch. I'm joined again by my colleagues Keely Jo French and Jacob Messick, and we're going to pick up on part two of our conversation regarding executive compensation. And if you haven't seen part one, stop what you're doing, go back to part one, and then come and pick up part two, if you can be that ambitious. So in part one, we talked about executive compensation, and we talked about recruit, retain, and reward. Executive compensation is known by a lot of things, but we boil it down to, do you have it? One, the question is what would you do if a key employee didn't show up for work? That's a question to the business owner. And that really is a subcontext for, do you have an employee, a key employee, that you either want to recruit, retain, or reward? That was our subject for the first part of this conversation. Now we can get to continue with the second part. So first of all, thank you for coming back. We got into a lot of different things, so hopefully we can expand on that a little bit more. We're going to play Myth or Reality. We're going to continue our game of Myth or Reality. For those of you who didn't see part one, Myth or Reality is the game that I'm going to ask them a question of myth or reality about some aspect or aspects of recruit, retain, and reward. Ready to jump back in?
Let's do it.
Do it.
All right. So, myth or reality? Recruit, retain, and reward has one benefit: keep good employees.
I'll go first. I'll go myth on that one.
I'd have to say myth too, because you said only.
Little college
How to bring out the lawyer there.
There you go.
No, it's that only word that is the reason for my answer of the myth as well. Because while yes, one of the main advantages of a recruit, retain, reward program is to benefit that key employee, there's also ways that you can benefit the business, the employer, in that type of plan, in type of that concept as well. And I guess I'll pause there and let.
And say keeping that employee has a bunch of benefits that kind of ripple out from there. You have higher income. You have other employees that stay around because they like them, which increases your company morale. You also ward off competitors who may be trying to poach your employees because you're offering them more in order to stay, which makes it more expensive for them to come in and poach them. There's so many other benefits. Would you have anything to add to that?
For me? Well, no. Well, you guys answer the questions. I just get to sit here and like read a little bit. So I guess when I think about it, yes, to answer your question, yes, only sort of throws that question out and certainly has to make it a myth. I just think in terms of recruit, retain, reward, the business owner oftentimes doesn't think about all of the benefits that are actually that are actually wrapped up into the idea of making sure that key employee either getting that key employee, having that key employee stick around, or rewarding that key employee for a job well done. Again, fancy word, those are a bunch of different ways to say recruit, retain, and reward. So no, I absolutely agree that it is a myth.
In addition to your part of the recruit, retain, reward program helps the business from the business growth and operations and profitability standpoint. Within the plan itself, the concept itself that's being used, and we're going to dive into some of those different concepts. There's benefits to the employer, whether it's a tax deduction or cost recovery or a share of the death benefit, kind of what we ended on at the end of the first episode on this topic. So there's the growth of the business, but then there's also, the executive compensation plan that's being used. There's benefits inside there depending on what's important to the employer, could also benefit the employer inside that program.
And I'd add to that, just when you said death benefit, it reminded me that, that gives you the gift of time when you're able to split the death benefit with the employer. And what I mean is that I don't have to go and find the very first candidate that applies for the job because I desperately need a warm body in this position, but I can actually take my time and I can vet out the candidates and find somebody that really fits my business and not really have to go in and hire the first person who could be a complete hot mess, for lack of a better term, and really just kind of mess things up even further for me. Instead, I have that little pile of money there that I can take my time, supplement my revenue, etc.
The value of the key person coverage inside of the plan for that benefits the employer, that's there for the employer in the event that something does happen to the key employee.
Hold on before we get to death benefit. Two things. We almost need to have the ability to pull out of the jargon jar. So like if you can boil something down to a hot mess and have that make sense, you should probably get to pull something out. So we just we need to workshop that in like in our meetings. No, and I know you don't have anything in there. I know exactly what you're about ready to say. Like that. That's fine. Whatever. Your time is coming. The other part is, Jacob, you did trigger something for me. When we think about recruit, retain, reward, and the benefits that maybe a business owner doesn't think about as it relates to having some type of program in place, I think about what we know about the business owner thinking bigger picture. Like, how am I going to pass this business on? Who am I going to pass it on to? Oftentimes, it's the key employee. And one of the things that we know that we've had valuation, like we have relationships with a valuation firm, business valuation firm, and what they tell us is having a plan. An executive compensation, maybe it's executive compensation, they would call it, we would call it, having a plan for recruit, retain, reward in place makes that business more valuable. And people may go, you mean paying out key employees in case something happens, or because they stayed a certain period of time makes the business more valuable? That doesn't compute to me. Here's why it makes the business more valuable. Because when the time comes that I'm the business owner and I want to sell the business, is a business more or less valuable if the key employees are incented to stick around when the business is like, I'm going to sell it to someone, and are you going to pay more or less for a business if you know the moment I take over that business, all the key employees are going to leave, or they're likely to leave?
Well, and I'll grow on that is, what if even one of those key employees want to take over the business from that business owner?
Absolutely.
By setting up an executive compensation plan, whatever strategy it may be, to retain and reward them, they're providing them a benefit to then have some funds to buy into the business. Maybe it's buying into the business over time. Maybe it's an installment sale, or using those funds as a down payment to go to the bank, get a loan to then purchase the business. So the employer, the business, is helping that employee with the funds that they are going to need for their eventual buyout, and that is a key benefit for that business.
If family isn't involved, oftentimes the key employee that you've presumably identified, that you've recruited at some point, that you've done enough to retain them up to this point, now you get an opportunity to reward them. That key employee oftentimes is the person most ready and most suitable to step in and buy the business and run it successfully going forward. So when we go back to the myth of reality, yes, it's not. While it's a benefit, it's not the only benefit, and there's a bunch of other things that should be considered as benefits, both for the employee and the employer.
Which is why the business owner should be having these conversations, thinking about this, because hey, putting something in place for their key employees also benefits them for all of these reasons that we've just been talking about. So in addition to, say, business continuation and business succession, executive compensation should be at the top of the mind for a business owner as they're growing their business.
Recruit, retain, reward. So, okay. Anything else you want? Okay, you're good there? You still want to slip up and have to put anything in the jar.
No, I had one and Jacob stole it, so I just was like, all right, I'm good.
All right. Okay. So, all right. So if we don't have anything there, let's move on to another myth of reality.
Okay.
Okay. Myth and reality. Recruit, retain, reward is better with a customization approach rather than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Hands down reality.
I don't know. I mean, everyone wants to think, hey, one size fits all is great, right? No, I'm gonna go reality as well. That customization is trumps one size fits all for recruit, retain, reward.
Okay, so both realities. That's a little bit different, but so let's hear it. Why? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I can go first.
Yeah.
So customization. So every single business is going to be different depending on what you're doing and who your key employees are. And your key employees are going to be motivated by different things. Some people may be motivated by a cash bonus today. Some people may be motivated by a stream of payments at some point in the future. Some people may want a life insurance policy, which we'll talk about here shortly. But your business is different at the end of the day. So why should it be a one-size-fits-all approach if your business isn't a one-size-fits-all approach? At least that's how I like to think of it.
Okay.
I'll agree with you. I mean, just like, personal finance is personal, each, from a business perspective, each business is different. And so by being able to use a customization approach, you can dial in the program, the design, the strategy, whatever you want to do to reward how, the key employees. Maybe it's one, maybe it's, more than one. They can dial in for that particular need for that business. So customization is definitely a key component when talking recruit, retain, reward.
Do you want to say something?
I would say I feel like a great way to customize though is through the use of life insurance, and I know we've kind of danced around this topic quite a bit.
Hold on, because that was where I wanted to go. I was like, but before we get into what customization looks like, and maybe actually give people some examples of the different types of customization when we talk about recruit, retain, reward. Let's just lay it out on the table. Why do we see? And I'm going to go ahead and preempt everyone. It's not because we're at a life insurance company, but why life insurance in recruit, retain, or reward?
See, that'd be a hard one to start off with. So why life insurance? Well, you can use life insurance for a lot of different reasons. I mean, it's a tax-deferred growth in the policy. So what money you give them today can actually grow and compound over time, which is wonderful. It's tax-free withdrawals up to your basis being how much money you paid for it, so you can withdraw money. I explained what it was. I protest.
Protest all you want, but
I explained what it was.
Protest all you want, but start grabbing. Put it in. Nope.
I got two in there. So
Okay, both of you. You guys are both full of it, and this is a huge protest.
I
explained what it was.
Now you're full of it too. You may proceed.
Basis. Basis is what you paid for in your premium. So you can withdraw all your money up to that point, and then it's taxable from there, and you get a tax-free death benefit. So it really adds a lot more to what you can do with it. Not only that, you can do what we call like a split dollar regime, which essentially means, and before you do this to me, it means that you can split the benefits, whether that's the cash value or the death benefit, between two people. In this situation, the employer and the employee. And I'll do it anyway.
Yes.
But
exactly. Okay, go ahead.
this is why you gave me this question. This
Yeah,
is rude.
exactly. Well, you said split dollar,
So-
not me.
Split dollar is really wonderful because not only that, you can implement what's a cost recovery for the employer. So the employer is paying all this money in premiums, but notice how it's compounding in that life insurance policy. So when it's time to finally roll it out to the employee as compensation, the employer can take back some cash value, or if the employee dies during that time period, they can take back whatever that they paid for it, and the employee is still left with this good pile of money over here. That's a great compensation for them. So it really adds some complexity in design and however you want to do something, and it still implements some of that control that we talked about in the previous episode.
So I'll try to see if I can summarize up very neatly and shortly what you've described here.
Prepare to pay.
No. Here's what that is. That's translation. You JD eggheads, let a normal person explain it.
All right,
That's what that is.
So
but,
to me,
but go ahead. You may proceed.
Two main things come to mind when using life insurance for the executive compensation, recruit, retain, reward. First and foremost, there is the death benefit protection. if something would happen to that key employee while they're working, there is a death benefit that gets paid out to the employee's beneficiaries to help them in that time of need. And with the, depending on the strategy, there could also be the split of the death benefit that goes back to the business for cost recovery, for key person coverage. So first and foremost, obviously a big component is the death benefit protection. The second part, whether it's the structure is set up that the employee owns a policy, that the employer is the owner, there's that cash, there's the tax deferred growth of the cash value inside the permanent life insurance policy. So that's a pretty big component that we talk about quite a bit as well. So to me, it all boils down to a lot of it is the death benefit protection, and then the cash value, the tax deferred growth component inside of using the permanent life insurance.
And I do want to add to that. So you mentioned cash value and it being owned either by the company or by the employee. Well, if it's owned by the company, and let's say, during that time period, the company needs some cash flow. Well, they have this pile of money in the cash value that they can actually withdraw on and use that for their business if they need it. So it's kind of handy, especially if you're the business owner, that if you fall on hard times, well, yeah, you have this compensation right here and you do still have to pay it at some point, but you do have this cash value that you can draw down on and use for your business needs. So if it's owned by the employer, that has its own benefits.
It's owned by the employer. It's an asset of the company. It's on their books. If it's the structure set up that the employee is owning the policy, because we talked about control versus complexity. If the employer doesn't need the control and they're comfortable with having the employee having the control, owning their own policy, well, now the employee has that tax deferred growth and the potential for the supplemental income that they can pull from the policy down the road, or for other uses, college funding,
Retirement.
et cetera.
Yeah.
All the things that we oftentimes talk about.
Yeah.
So there's a reason. There's several more than one reason. There's a reason why we think and talk life insurance. We'll see them in a lot of these plans. Now there are times though that that there are plans or ideas, concepts that we use that doesn't necessarily include life insurance. So let's talk just briefly. We've talked a little bit of life insurance. When we talk about customization, what other ways and it doesn't necessarily like we don't need to have a life insurance discussion, but what other ways? More importantly, what other questions might lead us to whether it's what you talked about with split dollar. And thankfully, you already said it and did a great job of explaining it, and we have the jargon jar to recognize that.
Which I dispute.
Fine. So we talk split dollar. Like, what are some of the other things? And we talk control and complexity, owning it. What are some of the questions that people might be thinking about that now that they may want to think about as it relates to where am I going to end up from a concept standpoint?
So, like Jacob mentioned in the last episode, tax deferral. Do you want a tax deduction today as an employer? Because from the accounting side of it, when you pay your employees, the employees include that amount in their taxable income. Well, the employer on the other side gets to take a tax deduction, but that really depends on when the employee actually receives that money and includes it in their income. So with executive bonus, one way to customize it, or recruit, retain, reward, you can pay it out immediately and get your deduction right now. Or you can wait till some point in the future and you say, hey, employee, work for me for 5 years. At the end of those 5 years, I'll pay you X amount of dollars. Well, you don't get that deduction in year 1, but you do get the deduction in year 5 when you finally pay it out. And the employee includes it in their income. We call this the matching principle.
Right. So tax deferral.
Tax
That's one.
deferral.
And timing of it, and
The timing of the tax.
timing, yeah. And I would say, another one that comes to mind is how much, is cost recovery, we talked about before, cost recovery, is cost recovery
Cost recovery for who?
for the employer, getting those dollars back. So let's say they wanted to set up some type of executive compensation reward for their key employee, and they wanted to contribute. We'll just make it nice and easy, $10,000 a year towards the plan, for the next 10 years. So they've put $100,000 towards this plan for this key employee. Are they concerned with getting that $100,000 back? and they, so that's cost recovery. Do I get this back at some point? Do I get it back when the employee retires? Do I get it back maybe later on, at their death as a share of the death benefit? Or am I not concerned about cost recovery and I just want to provide this benefit to that employee and not get anything back long term? So I think that's another conversation point that comes up quite often.
Tax deferral, cost recovery.
And
Anything
then
else?
I would throw in one more. What is your goal? Is your goal to recruit, retain, or reward? Because whatever your primary goal is here might change the type of compensation you do. For example, if your goal is just to reward and you're not really looking so much to retain long term, but you just want an upfront reward right now that's not as important to you, you might look into just a payment right up front. We call that a Section 162 bonus, which is just named after the IRC, and I'll put it in.
I was about to say,
but
your
it just
name in-
means I'm
your name
paying
in
you
Internal
cash.
Revenue codes. Of course, you're putting it in.
It just means I'm paying you cash today, and I'm not putting in a contract. Well, you can.
Reasonable compensation.
Reasonable compensation. Yeah, put one in. Reasonable compensation.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. If I have to pay, you have to pay. So, is your goal to retain? Because if it's to retain, then you might want to actually defer the payment to your employee and say, hey, employee, you have to work here for me for 5 or 10 years, and at the end of that time period, I'll pay you some money. That's retain, okay? Reward, retain, recruit. Well, you want to get people to come to your business, so maybe you're putting in a specialized kind of executive compensation plan that's really appealing to your employees to make them want to work for you. Or for other employees or potential employees, that would be like, okay, I really like the idea of potentially getting a life insurance policy out of this.
And I think with that that just goes into then the give and the take with the conversation is, okay, we're looking to retain them and we're going to set a service period that needs to be met. Well, as we look at that control versus complexity, that complexity starts to grow, which means more administration, potentially more cost to the business owner. So it's determining what approach fits their needs, their goals, like you mentioned. And what's nice is it's not, because it's not one size fits all, they don't have to set it up the same way for each business or for each employee that they're wanting to retain and reward. They have that customization ability to use different approaches for different individuals.
Absolutely. So yes on customization, no on one size fits all. There's several questions that we oftentimes will lead us to certain concepts that we use quite a bit.
And that's where I think it's important talking through these questions and as they talk through it, it's almost ranking them, whether it's 3 questions or 5 questions, ranking them 1 through 3 or 1 through 5, what's most important, and rank it from most important to least important. And as they're trying to see, all right, I really like this factor, but I don't really need this, it takes us down that flow chart of what approach may work for this situation and achieve that goal and address that problem.
Yeah, because little inside baseball here, we actually have we almost have like a flow chart almost that we these questions come up and we're always walking through the process of taking those questions and walking people through. So it's almost like a self-discovery conversation. Like, what is most important to you? I don't know. And then once you see it versus, so if that's important to you, here's what that means. And that's where the complexity versus control comes in place. Well, maybe I don't need that much control because I really don't want to do all of that. Or yeah, I really want that control, and I'm willing to endure a certain level of complexity. That's kind of how we walk people through this conversation of recruit, retain, reward. Would you guys disagree? I mean,
I like it.
how we
I
do
think
it.
that describes it very nicely.
Yeah.
I think we would just add one more question to that list, though, is what kind of business are you? Because that'll also change what you're looking at, too.
That does change, yes. When you say type of business, you're talking about
S corp, C corp,
there you go.
LLC, sole proprietor, partnership, etc. Depending on what you are, will really change, what actually makes sense for you and whether you're a shareholder or an employee. If you're both shareholder employee, that may change who you're trying to compensate, what kind of compensation you're actually trying to use.
That's exactly what I was going to say. From as you were talking through the different business types, is a lot of our conversation here today and the last session has been talking about non-owner key employees. If the key employee is an owner, well, that changes things a little bit, and that's a little bit different of a discussion. But those are all very important questions to address and talk through.
All discussions that you got to have. I think if there's anything to take away from from the second half of this conversation, well, the whole conversation, but certainly the second half of the conversation is you need to be thinking about it. We don't want it to actually keep you up at night, even though that's the way it's described. What keeps the business owner up at night, but you probably should be talking about it and walking through to have an understanding of exactly like what's most important to me if I'm the business owner. And then certainly the key employee is how am I going to be rewarded, or what's most important from a reward standpoint if you're able to be a part of those conversations. So it's having the conversation.
Well, it's like what you said. There's enough things to keep the business owner up at night. This doesn't need to be one of them. This is a conversation that can easily be had to think through, to put a plan in place. So that's just one less thing they have to worry about as they're trying to grow their business and achieve whatever goals they're trying to achieve through their business, through their organization.
All right, I think the Jargon Jar has benefited. I think hopefully the audience has benefited from this conversation. Any last closing words?
I was doing good on the Jargon Jar until now.
Well, you said IRC.
I lost.
First of all, you said IRC 162. That's automatic. Nope,
name.
That's automatic. That's
Okay,
automatic.
then you don't get to argue that non-qualified deferred compensation isn't too much.
It's not an internal revenue code section. Like, come on, of course.
It's its name.
Anyway, you guys got any party words?
No, I'm good. I made it through this session without throwing anything in the jar, so I will leave it at that. So I don't have any last second throw-ins. And no, I think we talk through everything that we normally talk about on a daily basis as we have these conversations. I mean, like I said, this isn't just for Wall Street; it's for Main Street. No matter the business size, large or small, they have key individuals at their business, and this is a conversation they should be looking to have as they are looking to bring new people in and retain and reward those existing employees that are key to the growth of their business.
Just ask yourself, what would you do if this employee didn't show up for work tomorrow? If you don't know where to start that conversation, start there.
Yep, I like it.
All right. Well, thank you both. Hey, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed our conversation on recruit, retain, reward, i.e. executive compensation. My name is Troy Branch, and this is Future Focus, a financial strategies podcast. Look forward to seeing you at the next episode.